The stagecoach jolted violently as it rattled over the last stretch of uneven dirt road, dust swirling in its wake. Inside, Eliza clutched her carpetbag to her chest and pressed her gloved hand against the window, peering out with anxious eyes. Golden fields stretched endlessly, the tall prairie grass rippling under the late afternoon sun like waves on an ocean. Here and there, cattle dotted the horizon, and the silhouettes of low barns and weathered fences came into view. Her heart fluttered with equal parts fear and hope. This was supposed to be the place, her new beginning, her promised home. She smoothed the creases in her dress, though the weeks of travel had left the fabric stubbornly wrinkled. A single curl of auburn hair had escaped her bonnet, tickling her cheek. She tucked it back quickly, wanting to look presentable. After all, the man she was about to meet would be her husband. The driver pulled on the reins, and the stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a sprawling ranch. The wood of the main house looked sun-bleached but sturdy, its porch shaded by a sloping roof where a rocking chair swayed slightly in the breeze. Off to the side stretched a large barn, its doors thrown open, and behind it, endless pasture framed by distant hills. The driver opened the door, and Eliza stepped down carefully, the hem of her skirt brushing against the dry earth. She inhaled deeply. The air was different here, clean, sharp with the scent of hay and horses, tinged with wood smoke. This was not the city air she had known all her life, this was the breath of wide open land. Clutching the letter she had read a dozen times on the journey, Eliza glanced around nervously. No one stood waiting. She had imagined a man at the gate, perhaps with a shy smile or a welcoming nod. Instead, she saw only a figure in the distance, half hidden in the shadow of the barn, bent over a fence post. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but her feet carried her forward as if guided by unseen hands. Her pulse quickened with every step. What if he takes one look at me and is disappointed? What if I've come all this way for nothing? The man straightened, tall and broad-shouldered, his shirt damp with sweat, his hands roughened from labor. He removed his hat to wipe his brow, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. His gaze lifted, steady and piercing, locking on her with an intensity that stole her breath. For a moment, the world seemed to hold still, the prairie wind stilled, the creak of the coach faded, even the birds fell silent. She swallowed hard and forced her voice past her dry throat. "Mr. Harper?" she asked, her words carrying across the quiet ranch yard. Inside the barn, Daniel Harper drove the last nail into the fence post with a sharp crack, the vibration humming up through the hammer into his arm. Sweat trickled down his temple, and he swiped it away with the back of his sleeve. The summer sun was merciless, and his mind was heavy with the never-ending list of chores, fences to mend, cattle to drive, a roof leak to patch before autumn storms came. A small tug on his worn shirt sleeve pulled him from his thoughts. Clara stood there, barefoot in the dirt, her weak blonde hair tangled from play. At 7 years old, she was sprightly yet solemn in ways that pained him. Her mother's absence had left shadows under her bright eyes. She pointed toward the road, her small brow furrowed. "Papa," she whispered, as though afraid to break the spell of what she saw. "There's a lady." Daniel set down the hammer, frowning. They weren't expecting visitors. No neighbors had mentioned anyone coming by, and mail had been scarce lately. Wiping his palms on his trousers, he stepped out of the barn and shaded his eyes. And there she was. A woman stood by the coach, her dress road-worn but carefully tended, her bonnet tilted back just enough to show a face framed with soft auburn hair. She looked uncertain, clutching something, a letter, perhaps, close to her chest. She wasn't like the peddlers or wanderers who sometimes drifted through. There was a grace about her, even standing hesitant in the dust. Daniel's frown deepened. A woman that fine had no reason to be standing in his yard. He was about to call out when Clara darted forward, her little legs kicking up puffs of dirt. "Clara!" Daniel barked, but she was already halfway across the yard, her thin arms flying like a bird set free. The woman bent instinctively, skirts swishing, as Clara crashed into her. Small arms wrapped tight around the stranger's waist. Eliza froze, caught between surprise and something deeper, a sudden warmth blooming where loneliness had lived. She glanced down into Clara's wide eyes, blue like the prairie sky, and her heart gave an unfamiliar twist. "God finally sent you to us," the girl whispered, her voice trembling with both hope and certainty. The words pierced Daniel like an arrow. His jaw tightened, the air thickening in his chest. He strode forward, his boots heavy against the earth. "That's enough, Clara," he said, his tone rougher than he intended. He reached for his daughter, but she clung tighter to the woman, burying her face in the folds of her skirt as though she had found a safe harbor. Daniel stopped short. The woman's eyes met his then, steady, searching, unsure. Something in them stirred memories he had long buried, the look of someone who needed belonging just as much as they did. But he pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford daydreams, not with 2 children depending on him. "You're mistaken," he said curtly, his voice guarded. "We weren't expecting anyone." Still, as the stranger laid a gentle hand on Clara's hair, Daniel's certainty wavered. Whoever she was, she had stepped into their lives like a candle lit in the dark. Eliza's breath caught as the little girl clung to her, the warmth of the child's small body seeping through the thin fabric of her dress. The words, "God finally sent you to us," echoed in her heart like a bell tolling in the quiet. She had never expected to be welcomed so instantly, so trustingly. It was as though the child had been waiting her whole life for this very moment. Eliza smoothed her hand over the girl's flaxen hair, hesitating. She didn't even know her name. She didn't know if she was supposed to touch her at all. Still, the child nestled closer, as if she belonged there. Then a shadow fell over them. "Clara." The voice was deep, firm, and edged with disapproval. Eliza looked up, her gaze colliding with the man who must be the father. He loomed taller than she expected, broad shoulders framed by the open collar of his work shirt, his hands roughened by labor. His eyes, though dark as storm clouds, held not welcome but suspicion. Eliza straightened quickly, suddenly aware of the dust on her skirts, the fatigue in her posture, the way her bonnet string was frayed. She must look a fool. This was not the graceful introduction she had imagined. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice faltering. I thought," she fumbled for the letter, holding it out with trembling fingers. "I received this. It said Mr. Harper needed a wife to help with the children." Daniel's eyes flicked to the paper but didn't take it. His jaw tightened. "I never sent for anyone." The words hit her like a slap. Her hand wavered, then lowered, the letter crumpling slightly in her grip. For weeks she had held on to that promise, a home, a family, a place to belong. Now it seemed to dissolve into the dust beneath her boots. Clara, sensing the tension, looked up at her father. "But Papa," she protested softly, "I prayed for a mama. And she came." Daniel's face softened for just a fraction, but he quickly masked it. He crouched down, trying to peel his daughter's hands away from Eliza's skirt. Clara resisted, tears brimming in her eyes. Eliza's heart twisted. She could not bear to see the child's hope crumble. "It's all right, sweetheart," she said gently, kneeling so they were eye level. "I don't know how it happened, but I'm here now." Daniel straightened, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can't just show up on a man's land, claiming Providence sent you. Mistake or not, I've got no use for strangers." His words were cold, but Eliza caught something underneath them, a rawness, a grief that clung to him like a second skin. He wasn't hard because he wanted to be, he was hard because he had to be. She rose to her feet, steadying her voice though her knees trembled. "With respect, Mr. Harper, I didn't travel halfway across the country for nothing. If this is a mistake, I'll accept it. But for tonight, all I ask is a roof over my head until I can sort out where I belong." Clara pressed closer to her side, her small hand slipping into Eliza's. "You belong here," she whispered again, as though daring her father to disagree. Daniel's gaze lingered on the sight, his daughter clutching the stranger as if she were salvation itself. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he gave a terse nod, his voice low and reluctant. "One night, that's all." But as he turned back toward the house, something unsettled him. He had meant it as a warning, a boundary. Yet deep down, he already knew, one night would never be enough. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and flour, though it carried the chill of a place that had known silence too long. Daniel pushed the door open with a creak, motioning Eliza inside. She hesitated at the threshold, then stepped across, her carpetbag clutched to her chest like a shield. The main room was plain, but sturdy, a wide stone hearth, a heavy table scarred by years of use, shelves lined with jars of beans and flour sacks tucked neatly in a corner. There was no touch of softness, no trace of a woman's hand, save perhaps a faded quilt draped over the rocker. Eliza's eyes lingered there, her throat tightening. Someone had once made this house a home, but now it bore only the marks of survival. "Clara, set the table," Daniel said gruffly, carrying the baby from his cradle in the corner. Little Sam squirmed in his arms, fussing with a pitiful wail that made Daniel's brow crease. He tried rocking him, but the baby only grew more restless. "May I?" Eliza asked softly, stepping forward. Daniel hesitated, then, reluctantly, handed the child over. The moment Sam rested against her, his cries quieted. Eliza hummed instinctively, a tune her mother had sung to her long ago. The baby's tiny fists unclenched, his eyelids fluttering as he drifted toward sleep. Daniel's arms felt strangely empty. He watched, jaw tight, as if unwilling to admit what he saw. At the table, Clara clattered the tin plates down unevenly, her face glowing with pride at her task. Eliza joined her, settling Sam in a cradle near the fire and rolling up her sleeves. "Would you like me to help?" she asked. Clara nodded eagerly. Together they kneaded a lump of dough left from earlier, Eliza guiding the girl's small hands. "Like this, fold, press, turn." She laughed softly when Clara's fingers stuck to the sticky mass. Soon they shaped a simple loaf, Eliza showing her how to braid the dough. "It looks like Mama used to make," Clara whispered, her voice half wistful, half hopeful. Daniel's chest tightened. He busied himself with cutting salt pork, unwilling to meet either of their eyes. By the time the meal was ready, the room felt subtly changed. The fire crackled, filling the corners with warmth. The scent of fresh bread mingled with sizzling meat. Clara chattered as she carried food to the table, her laughter ringing out like it hadn't in months. They sat together, an unfamiliar triangle around the scarred wooden table. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't hear only silence and the clink of utensils. He heard Clara asking Eliza questions, heard Eliza answering with gentle patience, heard the baby's soft sighs as he slept nearby. It unsettled him. It softened him. And it scared him more than the hardest winter. When the meal ended, Clara leaned against Eliza's side, yawning. "She should stay, Papa," the girl murmured sleepily. Daniel stood abruptly, gathering dishes, his voice clipped. "Don't speak of what can't be." But even as he said it, he caught the sight of Eliza brushing a curl from Clara's forehead, the child nestling closer, safe and content. It was a picture that pierced him deeper than he dared admit. And for the first time since he'd lost his wife, Daniel Harper wondered if God was asking him to open his heart again. Night fell softly over the prairie, the wide sky deepening into velvet black, stars scattered across it like diamonds spilled by a careless hand. Inside the Harper house, the fire burned low, its orange glow painting the walls in shifting shadows. Clara and little Sam were finally asleep, Clara curled beneath the faded quilt in her small bed, Sam nestled in his cradle by the hearth. Their gentle breathing filled the silence, a lullaby of innocence that wrapped the house in a fragile peace. Eliza sat in the rocker, her hands folded in her lap. She had taken off her bonnet, and the firelight caught glints of auburn in her loosened hair. Her eyes, though tired, carried a steadiness that came from years of having no choice but to be strong. Daniel lingered at the table, hunched over a mug of coffee gone cold. His broad shoulders sagged under invisible weight. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the pop of wood in the fire broke the quiet. At last, Eliza found her courage. Her voice was soft, so as not to wake the children. "I owe you the truth, Mr. Harper." His head lifted slightly, his expression guarded. "I answered an advertisement," she continued, her fingers twisting in her lap. "A man wrote that he needed a wife, someone to keep a home, to help raise his children. I thought it was you." She gave a brittle smile, half apology, half shame. "I suppose I was wrong." Daniel's gaze fell back to his hands, rough and scarred from years of labor. "You were," he said, his tone flat. But after a pause, softer, "I never placed such an ad." The words hung heavy between them. Eliza nodded slowly, though her chest ached with disappointment. Weeks of travel, of daring to hope, seemed foolish now. She glanced toward the cradle, where the baby slept peacefully. "Still," she whispered, "I can't say I regret coming. Not after tonight." Daniel shifted, uneasy. He wasn't a man used to sharing his thoughts, but something about the woman across from him, her quiet strength, her kindness with his children, broke down the walls he'd built. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the scrape of stubble loud in the silence. "My wife died 3 winters ago," he said finally, voice rough. "Clara was just 4. Sam was barely a thought in her mama's belly. Since then, it's been just us. And the ranch. He gave a humorless laugh. I never had room for much else. Eliza's throat tightened. She saw, in that moment, not just a hardened rancher but a man carrying sorrow like a stone in his chest. She wanted to tell him she understood loss, that she, too, had been left behind. In more ways than one. Instead, she said gently, children need more than a roof over their heads, Mr. Harper. They need warmth, stories, laughter, a hand to hold. Her eyes softened. I saw it in Clara tonight. She's hungry for love, and so are you. Daniel's jaw clenched, as though bracing against her words. Yet he couldn't deny them. The way Clara had clung to Eliza, the way the house had felt fuller, lighter, it had stirred something he had long buried. I can't promise anything, he said at last, his voice low, almost hoarse. But you're welcome to stay until you find where you're meant to be. Eliza met his gaze, her heart quickening at the crack she glimpsed in his armor. And what if I've already found it? She whispered, before she could stop herself. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks upward. Daniel looked away, his silence answer enough for now. But as he rose to add another log to the fire, his hand brushed hers, just a fleeting touch, yet enough to set her pulse racing. For the first time in years, both wondered if fate's mistake was no mistake at all. The morning dawned crisp and golden, sunlight spilling over the prairie grass like molten honey. Birds trilled from the fence line, and the smell of dew mingled with smoke from the breakfast fire. Inside the Harper home, Eliza moved quietly about the kitchen, stirring porridge while Clara chattered beside her, weaving daisies into a crooked chain. Daniel tried to busy himself with mending tack by the doorway, but his eyes kept drifting, toward the soft sway of Eliza's hair as she leaned over the pot, toward the way Clara's face lit with laughter in her presence. It had been so long since the house had echoed with such sounds. He told himself not to get used to it. The sound of hooves broke the morning calm. Daniel stiffened, rising to his feet as a rider galloped into the yard. Dust plumed behind him, his face red with exertion. He pulled his horse up short at the porch, tugging off his hat. Beg pardon, Harper, the man panted. There's been a mix-up at the station. His eyes darted to Eliza, then back. The bride was meant for Jacob Miller over at the North Creek Ranch. Not you. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Eliza's spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering against the pot. Heat rose to her cheeks, shame pressing like a weight upon her shoulders. Of course.